Hi, I'm Phyll Opoku-Gyimah, the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope Trust, and I'm so pleased to be in conversation with this amazing woman.
Thank you, Phil, and hello everyone. My name's Jennifer Namgyal. I am an advisor for gender mainstreaming with the Economic, Youth and Sustainable Development Directorate at the Commonwealth Secretariat. It's lovely to be here this morning.
So I guess this is International Women's Day and also Commonwealth Day, and there's so much going on, but I wanted to just ask you, what does celebrating International Women's Day mean to you, Jennifer?
I think, for me personally, it's really an opportunity every year to mark both the progress that the world has made in advancing women's rights and gender equality, but also to reflect on what is still yet to be achieved. And it's very exciting for me because over the years, this has grown and expanded in a way that I hadn't thought was possible 15 years ago when I was starting out in the space.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, celebrating the international women that we see up and down the country and all over the world is really important, but also acknowledging how far we've got to go is the important part. Economically, politically, culturally, socially, there are so many different aspects to what still has to change within the women and girls' rights movement and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 2020 marked 25 years from the Beijing Conference on Women, and countries, prepared reports to describe what had been achieved in those 25 years. And they really reflected an enormous amount of progress in that time. And I think what's really sort of important about 2021 is that following the pandemic, we can really see instances where that progress is being wound back with remarkable speed. And so it's just, I think, a really important moment to reflect on how far we've come, how hard won those gains were, and equally how quickly they could be wound back.
Yeah. So for those who are watching this and might not know about the work that you do, how best would you describe your work within the Commonwealth Secretariat?
So I guess the most helpful way to think about the Commonwealth is that it's a voluntary association of 54 independent and equal sovereign states. And, through this, it's home to about 2.5 billion people and includes, both advanced economies and developing countries and very big countries and very small countries. And what brings this group together are a set of shared values and principles. I work for the Secretariat, which is the intergovernmental body that serves the 54 countries. I work in the gender team, where we have a very clear mandate to work towards gender equality through the programs and activities of the Secretariat in a mainstreaming function. So our work has, I guess, two big pillars, if you can describe it as such. One is on building consensus on key issues with member countries. And this is done through our regular meetings of the heads of government and of ministers, as well as forums that are open to all, such as the Commonwealth Women's Forum. The second major pillar of our work in the gender section is on mainstreaming in the Secretariat's programs and activities and in supporting member countries that require specific assistance on this. So this includes working with the other directorates in making their work more responsive for gender equality, as well as directly with countries on a number of projects. So for example, we have a project that looks at estimating the costs, the economic costs of violence against women and girls in small states. We also support countries in specific policy development areas. So it's a fairly wide-ranging kind of scope of work. Within the Secretariat, our primary constituents, I guess, are the member countries. But as we'll discuss today, I think the Commonwealth is more than just the governments of the 54 countries. It's also the people, the civil society, the activists, all together. So Phil, you're the first queer Black woman to lead a UK-based international LGBT+ human rights charity. What has your first year and a half in the role been like for you?
You know, the last year and a half, I wouldn't have imagined that I would be trying to work through a pandemic at all. I don't think anyone envisaged what this pandemic has brought. But there's been real strength and also opportunity, even though there's also sadness alongside it, to see how we've been working on the ground, how we've managed to still pull together research to highlight the inequalities and the work that needs to be done within the Commonwealth countries which we work in. But I think more importantly, it's shown how resilient our human rights defenders and civil society organizations continue to be, even with the emergency and the needs that they have around navigating colonial era laws. And that has been where I've sat back to actually recognize the scale and magnitude of what goes on behind the scenes that people don't ordinarily see. And I'm very proud to be doing this work. It's not just about being queer, it's not just about being Black, it's not just about working with civil society, it's all of those things and more. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm continuing to learn and also unlearn how we do things better within civil society and what we can achieve now and for the future, and constantly reimagining the hope that we have and how that translates into real meaningful action. And I just wanted to ask you, Jennifer, you know, intersectionality has really gained a lot of steam over the past few years. It's a way of understanding those overlapping societal oppressions that, you know, impact the lives and lived experiences of marginalized people. You know, do you think the language of intersectionality is used and understood within the structures you work within?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Phyll. I mean, I do think the language is not always well understood, but I do think that the principles are increasingly becoming so. It's very much a work in progress. It's improving slowly. And I think, you know, as an intergovernmental organization, the Secretariat works to serve its member countries. And while I don't know that every member country would name it as such, there are requirements of the Secretariat to begin to address multiple overlapping forms of discrimination and marginalization is becoming much clearer. It's also been, I think, very clear to me as a person who's been working in this space for about 15 years that this is a feature that's increasing. And I think this would absolutely be the result of years of advocacy and activism from you know, from civil society groups, the women's movement, LGBTQ activists, individual activists. So there's still a really long way to go. And I do think we have a lot of work to do to make sure that inclusion isn't just a tick box exercise. But I am optimistic. And I think, you know, looking back over the last 10 or 15 years, even though it's slow, I think there has been real progress. Building on that a little bit, you've been a very big proponent of the importance of intersectionality, and you speak regularly with Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw. What have you learned about intersectionality that you're passing on to others?
I think for me, with the work that Kaleidoscope Trust does in looking at this through an intersectional lens has shown that the importance of breaking down how and where people are placed, what they have experienced, and the lives they lead means that we cannot just take a one-size-fits-all approach. And that is part of the learning that I will pass on, or that I aim to pass on, and make sure that it's not just in a very light touch, oh, all inequalities are bad, because inequalities affect everyone in different ways, depending on where you're situated. Jennifer, you recently wrote a blog post on the increase in women in parliamentary positions across the Commonwealth. What impact has this had on legislation issues, and is more women in parliamentary positions enough?
Thanks, Phil. More women in parliamentary positions is absolutely not enough. I think, we do tend to, in kind of international affairs, focus a bit on this as a metric of progress. But, my own view is that this should really be, the last, the sort of final example of women achieving things in public life. I mean, I think in terms of whether there is a measurable difference in the types of policy and legislation that women MPs carry forward and push for. There is some research that indicates that this is the case. Women parliamentarians have been advocates for more gender responsive legislation and policies across the Commonwealth. The Interparliamentary Union has done some studies on this, looking at kind of policy and legislative priorities of men and women MPs around the world, and you do see a noticeable expressed difference in the areas that they focus on, with women MPs, expressing greater interest in things like gender equality, social and community matters, family matters, education, healthcare, and so on. And in contrast, the type of policy areas that male parliamentarians express an interest in, the things like foreign affairs, economic and trade matters, and so on. Having said that, though, I do think we need to be careful not to suggest that women MPs are automatically going to promote and be more interested in inclusive policy and legislation. I think actually it's a broader point that when decision-making bodies are more diverse and look more like the communities that they represent, and gender parity is really only the very first step in that direction. But when you have bodies that look more like that, we start to see real attention being paid to being more inclusive in a true way in governing and lawmaking.
We both work through the Commonwealth to effect the change we need to see. Why is working through the Commonwealth structure so important?
A really important part of belonging to a group like the Commonwealth is that it allows countries to have dialogue and to build consensus and to move the window forward a bit on key issues. So a really great example over the last history is the strong and united front on racism that the Commonwealth has taken since its inception and continues to this day. The collective push to end apartheid remains a very proud moment for the Commonwealth, and member countries came together again last year to reaffirm their commitment to countering racial discrimination and inequity. So you can see that it really offers a space for kind of issues like this to be moved forward together. It's often described as a family of nations, and at the heart of this so-called family are sort of the three intergovernmental organizations that support its work. So there's the Secretariat, there's the Commonwealth Foundation that supports people's participation in democracy and development, and the Commonwealth of Learning, which promotes learning and distance education. But in addition to this, member countries are also supported by a network of more than 80 intergovernmental, civil, cultural, and professional organizations. And I think this is really a recognition that dialogue and consensus on key issues are important issues, not only for governments, but for everyone in those countries. And so I think, using the structures of the Commonwealth through its meetings, through its accredited organizations, through its institutions, is a really useful way to continue to build consensus on these issues. I think as we look at issues of marginalization and discrimination, these are very knotty problems. They have, they can take a long time to move forward on. And so I think having a grouping like this helps to open that space up. Phil, how has your experience as the co-founder of UK Black Pride and your time working for trade unions prepared you for working within a global structure like the Commonwealth?
I guess UK Black Pride is a movement which has fought for space, which it hasn't historically had, to celebrate the unique and nuances of our very diverse and intersectional communities. And from a trade union perspective, my learning was all about how we organize, how we mobilize, and how we educate, how that is amplified, but looking at employment rights and legislation about how people are treated within the workplace and much broader. Then when it comes to this global structure, for me, it's about how do we use the global space to advance our agenda on the many different fronts that I raised about how we look at intersectionality. So access to employment, housing, clean water, how women are experiencing sexism or misogyny in particular spaces, how Black and Brown and POC, which is people of colour communities, are still disenfranchised or still living in this colonial era state that disproportionately impacts them in such a way like no other. So the Commonwealth structure is so important. And I guess it still is learning and growing about how and who it works with. And as you know, Jennifer, we talk about sustainable development goals. And there's one that always rings true, which is about leaving no one behind. And our push from a Kaleidoscope perspective and TSEN is about we cannot leave any LGBT plus person behind. And we must do a lot more work to address these balances of power, to address the legislation which affect the way people live. And we must, importantly, understand equity, equality, inclusion, and diversity that should be at the heart of all the work we do. What would you say to a young woman around the world who might feel they want to help change the world?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's absolutely a really important ambition to nurture and pursue. I think I'd also say that change can be made everywhere. You don't have to wait for a particular platform or space to pursue it, and that we all have the scope to change the world. It's not pushing for social change isn't just reserved for some people. It's there for everyone. Phyll, you're seen as an icon for women in the UK and around the world. And what would you say to women who may be fighting for change, but who are hitting systemic roadblocks?
I guess I would say to every woman that comes up against this is that we see you, we're here for you, you're not alone, and we just want to know how to support better. I often feel quite emotional about the position I know that I'm in and acknowledging my own privileges, if that's a word that I should use, and the situation of being in the global north and the work that we do with the global south. And those sisters, those women, those mothers, those daughters, those aunties, those nieces, those women who are doing the very, very necessary work. Change is possible, and it's about being hopeful. It's about connecting to like-minded people who share those values that you have and finding ways to have a unified voice, an amplified voice, one that we can turn up on society, making it absolutely impossible for it to be turned down. One that we can connect in ways that we've never seen before, even though we are so different and so unique, but also have many shared commonalities. I think I'd want them to know that I see you, and wherever we can support, however and whatever we have to do, we'll do it to start breaking down those systemic roadblocks and barriers and walls.
That's a great note to end on, I think. Thank you so much for having me on this morning.
And thank you so much for just allowing me to share this space with you. And, let me end by saying, I really want to thank you and the Commonwealth Secretariat for all that you do, the changes that you're making, even sometimes when it feels like we want to affect change like today. I know that our building our relationship will continue, and may we go from strength to strength in all that we want to see. And let's keep on celebrating the amazing women of today, tomorrow, and of the future.